Hello, my dear friends. Here's a question that comes up very often in shul life. A person has yard site and he wants to daven for the Yomid on Shabbos, but this particular person doesn't have a great voice. So what takes precedence? Is it more important for the person with yard site to daven, or is it better to have somebody daven who has a pleasant or beautiful voice? What's more important, to inspire the congregation with a beautiful davening, or to let the person with yard site daven for the Yomid? So I want to share with you my response based on Dvar Torah in this week's Parsha. The Chumash, this Parsha of Naso, is 176 psukim. It's the longest Parsha in the Torah. The reason why it's so long is because the Torah at the end of the Parsha describes the karbanos that the Nasiim, the heads of the tribes, brought on the day that the Mishkan was erected, the tabernacle, and the Torah repeats those psukim over and over again. It says that the Nachshon and Nadav brought these karbanos, and then it has 3 or 4 psukim. It tells you exactly what karbanos he brought, and then goes to the next Nasi, and it says the next Nasi brought, and it details again exactly the same. It specifies all the same animals, the same karbanos. Asks the Ramban, why does it have to repeat the karbanos over? It could have just said Nachshon and Nadav brought A, B, C, D. And then it could have said, and the next Nasi brought the same as Nachshon, and the next Nasi brought the same as Nachshon. It could have just said everybody did the same thing. Why spend so much real estate in the Torah? The Torah's real estate is so precious. One word, one letter could teach us so many halachas. So why spend so much ink detailing over and over again the same thing? It could have been summarized in a few words. Says the Ramban that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants to bestow honor on those who honor Him. And the kavod for Nachshon and Nadav, who was the first Nasi, for him to bring the karbanos was a big kavod. He was the first. But the Torah, God wanted to bestow on the second Nasi as much kavod as Nachshon had. And if the Torah would have just said that the second Nasi brought what Nachshon brought, it would have been, the Ramban's words are, it'd be kitzer hakavod. It would be diminishment of his kavod, because you're saying, yeah, he's like the other guy. Therefore, the Torah spells out each Nasi over and over again. The Torah spells out exactly what each Nasi brought, even though it's repetitive. That's what Ramban says. It's a very beautiful answer, but the question is, it seems over the top. It seems inordinate to go ahead and repeat the psukim over and over again, so to give each Nasi kavod. It's too much. These were great people, no doubt. They would not have been insulted if the Torah had said, and they did the same as the first one. So, okay, everybody understood. The Torah doesn't have time to go, or space to go repeat the same thing over and over again. Why is it so important? The little extra cover that the Nasi will have, because the Torah writes his carbon. And moreover, isn't it a diminishment of the covenant of Torah? I never took a census, but I'm sure that most people space out in Parashas Naso, because it's just the same thing over again. How much could people concentrate on that? So it's a bizayon for the Torah. So why? Because you want to give a little more covet to the Nasi, you diminish the covet of the Torah. The Ramban says if you would have said that the Nasi did the same as the other Nasi, it would be kitzar covet. It would be diminishment of his covet. Yeah, but what about the covenant Torah that you're just repeating in a monotonous way over and over again the same thing? So the answer to this question is, what you see is that the covet of a person is more important than covet of the Torah. The Gemara says in Makkos that people who stand up for the Torah and they don't stand up for a Talmid Chacham are foolish, because a Talmid Chacham deserves more kavod than the Sefer Torah. In certain religions, the kavod that they give for the holy book or the holy books is far more important than the kavod of the individual, to the extent that if somebody will take the holy book and throw it on the ground, or will make fun of it, so that it'll start a riot, people will be murdered. It could be a whole spate of murders that take place, because the honor of the holy book is more important than the people. The Torah is the antithesis of that. You're never going to sacrifice people because of the kavod of a book, even if it's a Sefer Torah. You don't sacrifice people for a Sefer Torah. If there's a choice between saving a Sefer Torah in a fire or saving a human being, you run into the building, you save the person before, without even a thought. Of course, the person comes before the Sefer Torah. Yes, there is a place to cover the Torah, but not when it pales compared to the cover that you have to give to the individual. So the lesson that Torah is teaching is so powerful that, yes, it's important that the people should honor the Torah. Yes, it's important that during laning people should pay attention and they shouldn't fall asleep. But if it's going to be at the expense of the covet of the Nisim, and even though this was 3,000 years ago, and every single year we have to go through the same thing, and so many, who knows, millions of people have to sit there and attempt to have patience to hear the Kriya over and over and over and over and over and over. Why? Because the Torah wants to give cover to Nisim, and it's worth it, because it's not just it's cover to Nisim, but it's an enormously important and powerful lesson. It's not just that the Nisim get covered, it's that the Torah is teaching a value that people are more important than books. People are more important than everything. People therefore deserve to be treated with the greatest cover, even if it means that people will be bored. At the end of the parsha, there's a difficult pasuk. The Torah has all these psukim. It's about 80 psukim of the Nisim, of the Korbanos, and then at the very end, the Torah says that when Moshe came to the Olam Moed, to the Mishkan, to the tabernacle, he heard God talking to him. And where did he hear it from? It was Me'al Kaporos. It was the cover, Asher al Aron. There was a cover on top of the Aron. Mi bein shnei hakruvim. It was between the two cherubs. The kruvim were cherubs. They had angelic faces. And the Rashi says in Parashas Truma that they had images of tinokos, of young children, maybe infants or young children. Those were the kruvim. So the question is, what in the world does this pasuk have to do with everything else in the parsha? It's like out of no place. It sticks out like a sore thumb. We're talking about the Nisim's Korbanos. We spent like 80, 90 psukim on it. Now the closing line, all of a sudden, out of no place, the Torah says that when God came to the Olam Moed, God spoke to him from on top of the Aron, from between the two kruvim. So perhaps the answer is, the Torah is saying, why did God speak to Moshe from the kruvim? Why did God speak to Moshe from the Aron? And why were kruvim on top of the Aron? The Aron had the luchos. This is the ultimate in Torah. So why put kruvim, which were images of people, on top of the Aron? So the answer is because people are more important even than the luchos, even than the Aron. They more important in terms of the kavod that you have to give to a person. If the luchos would be in a fire, and a person would be in a fire, you would save the person before you would save the luchos. Of course, you have to have enormous kavod for the luchos and for the Torah, but the kavod for an individual, kavod abrios, that's supreme, because the kavod of the individual is also the kavod of Ribono Shel Olam, because every individual was created as a tzelem Elokim, and therefore it's so easy to have a mishkan and you have all these religious objects. And you might get carried away and think that these religious objects trump the cover that human beings deserve. So the Torah teaches a powerful lesson that on top of the Aron there was the kruvim. The kruvim were images of young children. They weren't even adults. They were young children, because young children have all the potential, the enormous potential for development. And you could see that Tzelem Elokim sometimes more easily in a young child, because their faces are angelic. Perhaps that's why they're called kruvim. Because a little baby, you look at a baby, they're pure, they're untainted. They don't have ulterior motives and all sorts of history of things that they did that are inappropriate. They're pure souls. So they're cherubs. They're angelic images. The Torah puts that on top of the Aron, where the Aron HaEdus, the Aron of, that's what the pasuk refers to as the Aron HaEdus, the Aron with the luchos, which were the Edus, the testimony. On top of the Aron is the Kruvim. And where did God's voice emanate from? Not from the Aron, but from Mibein HaKruvim. And the reason why the Torah puts it here is because, just in case you're wondering, why did the Torah have to repeat over and over again all these psukim? Isn't it monotonous? Isn't it a waste of our time? Isn't it going to put us to sleep? Is it fair to make us have to listen to all these psukim just because that you want to give a tiny little bit extra kavod to one of the Nesim? Is that so important? The answer is yeah, it's very important. Because kavod habrius, the kavod of the person, the kavod of the individual, the kavod of the tzelem Elokim comes before everything else. And you have to be willing to endure the pain of hearing all the psukim over and over again. I mean, it shouldn't be painful. A person's supposed to appreciate Torah. But even if it is painful, it's more important God's making a statement himself. God puts it in the Torah to tell you, you know what? I want it repeated over and over again to show you that every single Nasi deserves kavod. And just like every Nasi deserves kavod, every human being deserves kavod as well. And that's the grand finale, is to prove the point and to underscore it, is because God spoke to Moshe from the Kruvim, which were on top of the Aron. He didn't, the top of the Aron, you think that's the holiest place, that's where the Shekhinah is. No, God puts on top of the Aron, and in the Aron where the Luchos, God said to Moshe, put Kruvim, and that's where I'm going to appear to you. Because if you can't appreciate the value or the importance of the individual, then everything else is not worth anything. You can't have a Torah which does not recognize the chashivas, the importance of the individual. You take that out, it's not Torah, it's some other thing, but it's not Torah. You can have all these beautiful psukim and everything, and you can have a beautiful tabernacle, and you have the luchos and the aron, and the menorah and the mizbeach. You're going to take the person out of it and say the person's not as important as everything else, and close it down. Forget about it. That is not what Torah is all about. And that's why the Torah closes the parsha with the Kruvim were on top of the Aron to explain why every single Nasi, even though the Nasi, they didn't ask for the kavod. I'm sure they wouldn't have cared, they wouldn't have minded, but God is making a statement here. Every single person's kavod is important. And oftentimes when you have a crowd, people get lost in the crowd, and you give kavod to one person, another person, but they don't give it to everybody. Every single person deserves to have kavod. So the answer, in my opinion, to this question of what's more important, to have a beautiful davening or to let somebody who has yartzeit daven for the Amid, so I would say more important that the person who has yartzeit should daven for the Amid, not because the yartzeit is more important than the beautiful davening. That I don't. If you talk about it in those terms of what's more important, the minhag of davening for the Amid for yartzeit, or having a beautiful davening, I'm not sure what the answer to that question is. But I don't think it's important. The answer to the question has to do with the fact that if the person is going to feel slighted, if he's going to be hurt, then it's more important to let the person daven, even though it means sacrificing people's kavanah during davening, even though it's going to be less inspiring, but the person always comes first. The kavod, as long as the people are doing the right thing, kavod habrios comes first, and that's more important than having a beautiful davening. Then this is the one of the lessons that we're supposed to take away from the Sfiras Omer, that the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva perished because they didn't treat each other with kavod. 24,000 Talmidim died. What it was catastrophe. But it's just, how could that be? Because they didn't treat each other with kavod. And as I said over and over, I spoke with this on Shuas many times. They didn't insult each other. They weren't machabed each other. They didn't show each other kavod. But it's a tremendously powerful statement. The kavod that every single individual deserves is paramount, and that's something that applies not only to the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva, and it's not only the kavod in the Siyam, but we interact with people all the time, and we have to show every single individual the kavod that they deserve, because each person is a tzelem Elokim.